Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 16 tight end and quarterback rankings for the 2024 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, I'm covering all topics related to those two positions, beginning with matchups, then transitioning into my top 16 rankings. If you guys are looking for my thoughts on an individual tight end or quarterback, you can travel down to the description of the video. We have timestamps available there, like in every single video. While you're down in the description, if you have not yet already, of course, be sure to subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification button. Besides the daily content in regards to helping you trying to win a 2024 fantasy football championship, we're also live streaming every single day on the channel, answering questions. So if you have any Week 16 starter sit questions, be sure to join us later tonight after the Denver Broncos take on the Los Angeles Chargers. I'll be live here on the channel, and I'm more than happy to help in regards to Week 16 start or sits. Thank you very much. Now, speaking of tonight's game between the Los Angeles Chargers taking on, of course, the Denver Broncos, for those of you who want to tail the upcoming entries that we put together via Underdog, be sure to travel down to the description, use code Andrew today, and make that first time deposit minimum of $10, because not only will you be able to tail the upcoming entry, which is, of course, Cortland Sutton and Ladd McConkey both going higher on 4.5 receptions going into tonight's game, you'll also be able to claim the first time deposit offer and, of course, get my rankings sent to you from my email directly to yours every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. These rankings are by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, and includes flex. So for those of you interested, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility. If in fact you are eligible based on your current location, then you're good to go. But if you are not and potentially have used my code or somebody else's code in the past and want to still get those rankings, you can find them via Patreon, link also down in the description. Thank you very much. Okay, let's go ahead and begin by talking about matchups in regards to the tight end position going into Week 16. As we all know, there are stud tight ends, and there are tight ends that we can trust every single week, week in and week out, regardless of whether they have an advantageous or disadvantageous matchup. But we want to look at these statistics in order to give ourselves a little bit more confidence regarding specific players, such as David Njoku taking on the Bengals, even though DTR will be playing quarterback. Or, for example, Brenton Strange, who we have a lot of hopes for going into this week based on his most recent performance of 11 receptions on 12 targets, taking on the Las Vegas Raiders, a top-tier matchup. Or potentially Trey McBride, one of the top-tier tight ends, taking on the Carolina Panthers, which gives us even more confidence within the given week. Either way, we know who our stud tight ends are. We know we have to fire them up, whether they have an advantageous or potentially disadvantageous matchup. For example, Jonnu Smith taking on the San Francisco 49ers. Regardless of these situations, we know that our stud tight ends get themselves the highest volume of opportunity, have the highest potential for touchdown upside, and we have to continue to lean in the direction. Therefore, we'll continue by talking about my top 16 tight end rankings, beginning with our number one, Trey McBride of the Arizona Cardinals. Of course, like I mentioned just moments ago, he's taking on the Carolina Panthers. They are the fourth best matchup at the tight end position, allowing over 14 fantasy points per game on average since week 6. Besides that, of course, in the last 4 weeks, Trey McBride has been unstoppable, producing a minimum of 10 targets and 7 receptions each of the last 4 games. This most recent week, 10 targets, 9 catches, 87 receiving yards, and 13.2 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. Of course, in a full PPR, he's absolutely taking over the league, and he has yet to score a receiving touchdown as late, but hopefully the upcoming matchup taking on the Carolina Panthers can present him red zone upside within the given matchup. But of course, as we all know, an auto start. Another auto start at the tight end position and the current number one tight end in fantasy football is Brock Bowers. Of course, we have heard more information as the week has progressed that Aidan O'Connell could end up returning. In the event in which he does, it's only going to continue to increase the potential for upside for Brock Bowers in comparison to what Desmond Ridder, of course, provided last week against the Atlanta Falcons. Last time out with Aidan O'Connell taking on the Kansas City Chiefs in week 13, Brock Bowers was showered with targets, 14 targets, 10 receptions, 140 and a touchdown, 25.2 fantasy points against the Chiefs. This week takes on the Jaguars, which is the sixth best matchup. If Aidan O'Connell's fired up and ready to go, I expect Brock Bowers to ball out once again. Our number 3 is George Kittle. As long as we're in a situation in which Brock Purdy isn't going to be playing in heavy rain or snow, George Kittle should be implicated for a high volume of fantasy points. Thus far this season, in the last 8 games in which he has played with Brock Purdy, in which there has been no heavy weather conditions, snow or rain, whether that be the Los Angeles Rams or Buffalo Bills game, in all of those 8 consecutive games, George Kittle's put up 12 or more fantasy points. He takes on the Dolphins, the 9th best matchup at the position. I expect continued success for the 49ers offense and, of course, George Kittle within the upcoming week, taking on Miami with a controlled weather environment. Moving on to our number 4, speaking of the Miami Dolphins, we have Jonnu Smith, who's coming off another incredible week, 9 receptions on 11 targets, 48 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown late in that game. Jalen Waddle is expected to miss, and if in fact he does, it's only going to increase the potential opportunity for target share for Tyreek Hill and Jonnu Smith within their own right. So as long as Jonnu Smith is the primary red zone target, which he has been over the course of the last 5 games, having scored 5 receiving touchdowns for this offense in that span of time, as long as those red zone targets continue to go in his direction, as long as he continues to get himself double-digit target opportunity, of course, he's an auto start every single week henceforth. Number 5, we have Sam LaPorta to begin the A tier. Look, Sam LaPorta is coming off of a fantastic game, his best game of the season in my opinion. 10 targets, 7 receptions, and 111 receiving yards, primarily because Jared Goff had 59 total passing attempts, which of course helped because they had to ditch the running game, having been down 14 plus points early in that game against the Buffalo Bills, and in a negative game script, had to throw for the majority of the game. Therefore, we're going to be in a situation in which Sam LaPorta is going to get himself less target opportunity because Jared Goff's going to go from 59 passing attempts to 29 this given week. Of course, he would really have to rely upon touchdown upside. Luckily, he takes on the Chicago Bears, which are the 7th best matchup. Earlier this season, back in week 13 against the Chicago Bears, Sam LaPorta scored 2 receiving touchdowns, put up 14 fantasy points. We're hoping for very similar production in the absence of David Montgomery, hopefully within the red zone, could find himself more opportunity share within the mix. Moving on to our number 6, we have David Njoku. Now, this is 100% contingent on him being available. Of course, last week on Sunday morning, he did end up testing his hamstring prior to the game. Obviously was not activated because there still wasn't at 100% capacity there. But as we progress throughout the week, if he can be 100% healthy by this upcoming Sunday and can play, regardless of whether it is Jameis Winston or DTR, which is expected to be the starting quarterback, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, I would still anticipate him to find success considering they are taking on the Bengals. They're the number 1 matchup at the position, allowing nearly 15.5 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Earlier this season, back in week 7, in a game in which DTR had 24 passing attempts, 6 targets, 3 receptions, 20 receiving yards in the direction of David Njoku, a 25% target share, which is solid. But in that game, David Njoku against the Cincinnati Bengals in week 7, 10 receptions, 76 yards, and 1 receiving touchdown for 18.6 fantasy points. I would expect him to be a fantastic option under the assumption he's healthy and ready to go. Moving on to our number 7, we have Travis Kelce. Look, Travis Kelce has to start because he's Travis Kelce. We know what his potential upside looks like. But Noah Gray, as of late, obviously has been really detrimental to his overall upside of production, having scored 5 receiving touchdowns in the last 5 games. Noah Gray is certainly doing his damage, but this week they take on the Texans, the 12th best matchup at the position. We are hoping that Travis Kelce can find himself more target opportunity than, the 6 to 8 targets that he is getting. Hopefully we can get back into that double-digit range. But for those of us who are in desperate need of a high upside performance, we really need him to score a touchdown. Otherwise, we're pretty much expecting a 6 to 10 point player at very best based on receptions and receiving yards isolated. Moving on to our number 8 to begin the B tier, we have Brenton Strange. Like I mentioned earlier, they take on the Raiders. It is the number 2 matchup at the position. Now going into this week, we should continue to anticipate that Doug Peterson is going to send the ball in the direction of Brenton Strange because that's how his offenses have always been kind of set up. Always trying to get the tight end position as much opportunity share as possible. Whether it has been Evan Ingram this most recent season, or of course, when Doug Peterson was the former head coach of the Eagles, getting Zach Ertz all those touches. So going into this week, Brenton Strange should be a featured option, especially considering there isn't much target competition outside of BTJ with all the injuries that have taken place within the receiving core of this offense. No Gabe Davis, no Christian Kirk, no Evan Ingram. Therefore, Brenton Strange should be a solid option taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. Our number 9 for this week is Dalton Kincaid. Finally came back from his injury this most recent week. Obviously, he hadn't played since the week 10 matchup against the Indianapolis Colts, so it had been some time off, but he immediately comes back and is in the top tier conversation in terms of total targets within this offense, tying with Khalil Shakir. So as long as he's going to continue to be in that top tier conversation in terms of target opportunity, taking on the New England Patriots should be more of what we saw last season. In the 2 matchups against the New England Patriots in 2023, 4 receptions, 87 yards, 8 receptions, 75 yards for 11.5 and 10.7 fantasy points. The New England Patriots thus far this season allowing 10.83 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends since week 6. The 13th best matchup. Considering the Bills have scored 30 plus points in 8 consecutive games, you would assume that, of course, if this offense is going to score 4 to 5, maybe 6 touchdowns every single game, maybe there's a possibility that Kincaid, outside of receptions and receiving yards, can find himself with touchdown upside. Moving on to our number 10, speaking of touchdown upside, that is 100% what we are relying upon with Pat Freiermuth, who has scored a receiving touchdown in each of the last 3 consecutive games. Even in the absence of George Pickens, there hasn't inherently been an increase of target opportunity. Last time out against the Baltimore Ravens, he individually didn't have himself a great game, but the combination of Freiermuth and Washington as a duo combined for 6 catches, 56 yards against the Baltimore Ravens. Again, the Baltimore Ravens earlier this season were a solid matchup for tight ends, but as of late, certainly has not been the case. We are purely hoping for touchdown upside. Now, speaking of the Baltimore Ravens, let's talk about Mark Andrews at number 11. Very similar to Pat Freiermuth. He has also scored a receiving touchdown in each of the last 3 games, 1 per game minimum. But what gives me a little bit more confidence regarding Mark Andrews' touchdown upside is the fact that he has scored 8 receiving touchdowns in the last 9 games that he has played. The only problem being is that Isaiah likely gets himself a little bit more utilization than the backup tight end for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Last time out against the Pittsburgh Steelers, we saw Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely combined for 6 catches, 97 yards. Of course, the bulk majority of that going in the direction of Isaiah Likely. Hopefully, Mark Andrews will be relevant within the given game. Of course, this most recent week, in a week in which Lamar Jackson has 290 passing yards, 5 passing touchdowns, when Mark Andrews leaves the game with only 2 catches for 24 and a touchdown, it seems like we haven't actualized his overall potential for upside. Hopefully they can do that this week against the Steelers. Moving on to our number 12, we have TJ Hockenson. The only reason Hockenson sits at number 12 is because there is an expectation of heavy rain going into this weekend's game against the Seattle Seahawks. Based on the most recent report, it is said to be a 90% chance of rain. If it's going to be heavy rain for the entirety of this game, I believe not only is TJ Hockenson negatively effective, but of course, Sam Darnold, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and all the receiving members of the Seattle Seahawks offense. So we'll have to keep that monitored as we approach this upcoming Sunday. Now, in the event in which the weather dissipates and we're not going to have a heavy rain game, of course, we've most recently seen Trey McBride torch this defense. The Arizona Cardinals tight ends twice in the last 4 weeks went for 8 catches, 84, and 13 catches, 138. So we'd expect for high levels of potential upside from TJ Hockenson, assuming, of course, the weather is not going to negatively impact his upside for success. Moving on to our number 13, Tucker Kraft. There is a potential which Luke Musgrave does return this week, which could certainly impact the overall upside for Tucker Kraft in terms of target opportunity. But even earlier this season, weeks 1 through 4, in which we saw Luke Musgrave active, Tucker Kraft was still getting himself a 70-30 or 80-20 split of overall snaps within the given offense. As it currently stands, the Packers are minus 14-point favorites. Outside of scoring a touchdown, really Tucker Kraft is not going to be a super valuable prospect for receptions and receiving yards, considering there are so many mouths to feed within this offense. And the Packers are expected to take a very early lead in a snow game in which it could just completely lean on the running game for the entirety of that second half. Moving on to our number 14, we have Hunter Henry. Look, I love Hunter Henry just as much as anybody, but the issue is about 5 to 10 points on average every single week are being sent directly in the direction of Austin Hooper. And considering that continues to impact, Hunter Henry negatively, his overall upside for success is being capped because of the utilization of Austin Hooper. Therefore, yes, I can trust Hunter Henry to get himself a solid target opportunity, but the upside of getting himself into the top 12 conversation has certainly been limited based on the most recent utilization of Austin Hooper. Let's move on to our number 15 and number 16. Really, there aren't very many tight ends that I can trust. I could have theoretically suggested Noah Gray or Stone Smart, but going into week 16, we don't want to get cute with our rosters. Therefore, we'll just suggest Jake Ferguson and Cade Otton as potential upside plays, as this could be a shootout between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Dallas Cowboys this upcoming weekend. All right, with this all covered, let's move on to the quarterback conversation. In regards to matchups, the Falcons, Buccaneers, Jaguars, Browns, Bills, Bengals, Patriots, etc. are the most advantageous matchups based on passing statistics isolated, passing yards, touchdowns, and interceptions. Now, very similar to the tight end position, the quarterback position has auto start studs that we have to continue to fire up every single week, regardless of whether they're in an advantageous or perhaps a disadvantageous matchup. The name that has been tossed around a lot this week has been Jayden Daniels, and whether we trust him, even though he's taking on the Philadelphia Eagles, who is quite literally the most difficult matchup at the position, and earlier this season, he didn't find himself in abundance of success taking them on. But again, we'll go into even further details regarding these matchups as we progress, but I just wanted to go ahead and give you guys an idea as to what matchups could look like going into this week based on averages between weeks 6 through 15. But with that all covered, let's go ahead and let's begin with our number 1 quarterback of the week, Josh Allen. Of course, he's coming off of a 50 and a 40-point fantasy game in the last 2 weeks. He is the greatest fantasy quarterback of all time. There's no question about it, and you continue to fire him up. On number 2, we have Jalen Hurts, who's coming off of himself another fantastic performance and approached that Pittsburgh Steelers game on a mission to prove that he can get it done on the ground through the air. On the ground, 15 attempts for 45 and a touchdown through the air, a 78% passing completion percentage, 25 of 32 passing, 290 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, and delivered a fantastic performance. This week, taking on a division rival, the Washington Commanders. Last time out against them in week 11, 18.7 fantasy points in a game in which it was all Saquon Barkley. So hopefully this week they'll continue to commit to the passing game and lead to even more potential for upside in the case of Jalen Hurts. Moving on to our number 3 to close out the S tier, we have Lamar Jackson. Of course, like I just recently mentioned, this most recent week, Jalen Hurts torched the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, went for 290 through the air, 2 passing touchdowns, and a 78% passing completion percentage. Considering Lamar Jackson's coming off a week in which he was 21 of 25 passing, an 84% passing completion percentage, 290 yards, 5 passing touchdowns against the New York Giants, I would anticipate that even though he had himself a lackluster performance earlier this season against the Pittsburgh Steelers, he should find himself in abundance of overall upside for success, whether it's on the ground or through the air. Again, we know what his capabilities are, considering the lack of utilization of Derrick Henry down in the red zone as of late. It only continues to elevate Lamar Jackson's baseline of production. Moving on to our number 4. Listen, Joe Burrow as of late has been unstoppable. 6 consecutive games of 3 or more passing touchdowns scored. He takes on the Browns, which are the 4th best matchup at the position against his division rival. Again, we should anticipate Joe Burrow to continue to light it up, considering, of course, DTR will be the starting quarterback of the Cleveland Browns, which will lead to more potential 3-and-out situations, if not turnovers, which will allow Joe Burrow to have short field opportunities to continue to score within this offense. Let's move on to our number 5. We have Jayden Daniels. Look, Jayden Daniels has played incredibly well as of late. Over the course of the last 2 consecutive games, an 80+% passing completion percentage in each of those contests. Of course, in the last 3 weeks, has been averaging 9.8 fantasy points per game just off of rushing statistics isolated. Again, as long as he continues to play at this high of a level, taking on the Philadelphia Eagles this week should not worry us. I'm not worried in any sort of capacity. I am firing him up because, of course, I know what his upside for success looks like. Even though last time out against the Pittsburgh Steelers on that Thursday Night Football game in Week 11, only had 13.4 fantasy points. I understand that there was a lackluster performance, but in comparison to that, the most recent performances since then have all been either 2 or more passing touchdowns and, of course, 23 or more fantasy points in the last 3 consecutive weeks. I'd expect for high upside from Jayden Daniels this week, especially on the ground within this upcoming contest. Moving on to our number 6, we have Baker Mayfield. Look, Baker Mayfield, very similar to Joe Burrow, is now getting himself on that streak of 3 or more passing touchdowns. This most recent week, 4 passing touchdowns, 288, an 82% passing completion percentage. Taking on the Cowboys this week, the 10th best matchup. We would anticipate, considering all the injuries and, of course, the inconsistencies of this secondary as of late, it should open up opportunities for Baker Mayfield and, of course, Mike Evans to light up the secondary and continue their streak of success as they are on their way, slowly but surely, to the NFL playoffs. Moving on to our number 7, we have Jordan Love. Look, as of right now, the Packers are minus 14-point favorites. The only thing that concerns me regarding Jordan Love is the weather this upcoming Monday night against the New Orleans Saints in Green Bay. If it's going to be a snow game, we could potentially pivot away from Jordan Love on Sunday morning, but of course, we're going to keep that monitored. In the event in which he is not going to be implicated within a snow game, I would anticipate taking on the 13th best matchup at the position. He should be able to get himself his 225 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns minimum, if not even more potential for upside with a 3+ passing touchdown game if the opportunity presents itself. Moving on to our number 8, we have Brock Purdy. If we can get Brock Purdy out of the rain and the heavy snow, he should be fantastic, because if we exclude those 2 performances against the Rams and the Buffalo Bills in the last 3 games, the last 6 games in which Brock Purdy has been in normal weather environments, he is averaging 21.93 fantasy points per game in a 4-point per passing touchdown league in the last 6 games he has played. Taking on the Dolphins this week, a top 12 matchup at the position, I would anticipate for Brock Purdy to be a significantly better option, especially with Isaac Guerrero going down and out for this week. They should continue to lean upon the passing game, and of course, Brock Purdy to carry the ball with his legs and potentially find rushing touchdown upside within the category. Moving on to our number 9, Jared Goff. Look, consistency has been Jared Goff's middle name over the course of this entire season. He has thrown 2 or more passing touchdowns in 10 of the last 12 games, and as long as he is going to be implicated for 200+ passing yards, 2 touchdowns, he is a consistent start, because we know that going into this week, there is a potential which, in the absence of David Montgomery, he may have even more upside with red zone opportunities going in the direction of Jahmyr Gibbs within the passing game, Sam LaPorta, Tim Patrick, who has in the last 2 weeks been himself a fantastic red zone option, having scored 3 receiving touchdowns within the category. Hopefully they'll continue to light up these defenses, as the Lions have recently demonstrated that they can throw the ball 50+ times and completely light up teams. There's a reason why the Lions thus far this season are number 1 amongst all teams in terms of total points scored per game on average in the National Football League. Moving on to our number 10. Taking on the Carolina Panthers is Kyler Murray. Look, Kyler Murray had multiple opportunities for touchdowns this most recent week. Unfortunately, many of those opportunities were either dropped by Marvin Harrison or led to James Conner having 1-yard rushing attempts that led to touchdowns. Nonetheless, going against the Carolina Panthers, the 11th best matchup at the position, we would assume that if Cooper Rush can come off of a week in which he is throwing 3 touchdowns, at least Kyler Murray should get himself his 200 yards and 2 passing touchdowns minimum, hopefully finding rushing upside for success within the given week in a matchup in which they should be leading for the entirety of this game. Moving on to our number 11, we have Anthony Richardson. Again, this most recent week taking on the Denver Broncos defense, a difficult matchup, but it should not be the case taking on the Tennessee Titans. The Titans have allowed 2+ passing touchdowns to opposing quarterbacks in 8 of the last 10 games. I anticipate Anthony Richardson to get himself a lot of success through the air and, of course, continue his normal success on the ground, which typically is about 10 fantasy points per game minimum over the course of the last couple weeks. Moving on to our number 12, Sam Darnold. The only reason Darnold sits at number 12 is primarily because, again, if he is going to be in a game in which it's heavy weather weather and heavy rain, I would not anticipate him to find much success in Seattle if in fact we're going to have ourselves a rain game in which Aaron Jones and Cam Akers will be called upon to carry the ball 30 plus times as a duo. So as long as the weather is not going to be an issue, I wouldn't worry about it. But again, as we continue to trend towards Sunday, it's not looking great for the overall weather conditions of that game. Moving on to our number 13, we have Matthew Stafford. Look, Matthew Stafford's coming off of a weather-conditioned game in which he had an absolute disaster of a first half, 2 for 11 passing. But as we progress, hopefully taking on the New York Jets this week in a controlled weather environment, early Sunday morning in New York, it looks like it's going to be clear skies, not a problem. Sure, it'll be cold, but the fact of the matter is the New York Jets secondary has been a problem. They have been giving up many of points through the air, whether it's yards or touchdowns recently. Mac Jones, 294, 2 touchdowns. Tua Tagovailoa, 331, 2 touchdowns. Anthony Richardson, 272 through the air and a touchdown. Michael Carter, Jalen Mills, DJ Reed, all dealing with injuries, only leads to Matthew Stafford finding himself even more upside for success. Number 14. We have Patrick Mahomes. Earlier today, it was mentioned that Patrick Mahomes will, in fact, start this upcoming Saturday against the Texans. Very promising sign. Again, the Texans are an advantageous matchup in terms of wide receivers and, of course, the quarterback position. So as long as he is healthy, he has proven time and time again that Patrick Mahomes somehow has like a Wolverine healing factor. And regardless of what the ankle injury looks like, he's going to limp his way through the entire game and probably score at least 2 touchdowns minimum to find ourselves fantasy success. Moving on to our number 15, we have Tua Tagovailoa. Look, Tua is in a situation in which, of course, he's still coming off of his most recent game of a 73% passing completion percentage, but every single turnover that he had, and he had 4 turnovers. One was a fumble, obviously because of the pass rush, hitting him on the blind side, but all 3 of the interceptions that he threw were horrible. All of them were either underthrown or thrown behind Tyreek Hill, which led to interceptions. Tua's got to be better, and hopefully he can find himself a little bit more potential for upside taking on the San Francisco 49ers defense this given week. All right, moving on to our number 16, we have Justin Herbert taking on the Denver Broncos later tonight. I would anticipate, considering the lack of a running game, we should continue to lean upon Justin Herbert to air it out within the upcoming contest and hopefully find himself rushing upside with his legs within the red zone. And I also wanted to go ahead and throw in an honorable mention, number 17, in case Sam Darnold, again, in that weather is going to be a problem. Aaron Rodgers could be a pivoting option going into this upcoming Sunday, just in case. But that's going to cover it in regards to my top 16 tight end and quarterback rankings. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Again, I'll be live later tonight. Be sure to swing on by if you have any questions. Outside of that, thank you, everybody. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.